Hello, I'm meteorologist Brad Winter from Region Weather Live, your YouTube source for weather across the Dakotas and Minnesota, with an update on the deep upper level low that's going to be causing problems across our region. And here already Tuesday night, you can see those storms rumbling across South Dakota, and we've even had a few severe thunderstorm warnings down in the southwest, south central parts of South Dakota with 60-mile-per-hour winds and 3/4-inch hail as these are moving east around 35 to 40 miles per hour. Now, as these storms continue to push eastward overnight and eventually into Minnesota, a lot of this moisture is going to make it up and begin to wrap around and into northwestern parts of North Dakota. Now, notice up in the northwest, there is a winter storm warning out for just kind of that Crosby and Kenmare areas where we're looking at the possibility of somewhere in the 5 to 12-inch mark as far as snowfall accumulations and wind gusts of 40 miles per hour. Well, the remainder of you here in the purple, that's a winter weather advisories where we're looking in that range of 2 to 7 inches. It's going to vary quite a bit just because it depends on how exactly this storm tracks out as to how much some of you will actually get. And so let's take a look at the forecast here as we see those storms continue to push eastward and develop into Minnesota. Right around 4 a.m. or so, those storms begin to develop. Now notice again, those areas up in the northwestern parts of North Dakota turn over to snow as that moisture wraps in there. So that cold air definitely in place. We're going to be looking at kind of miserable conditions up there to start the day on Wednesday. And so for now, if we kind of keep our focus up in that part of our region, up in the northwestern parts of North Dakota, notice how that snow kind of moves off to the north fairly quickly as this low pressure moves in and pulls in some of that drier air into here, kind of pushing off that snow to the north. And the last few runs have been kind of consistent with this, but some of the earlier ones kind of had that moderate snow lingering in that northwestern parts of the state to just a little bit longer into the afternoon. So again, that's kind of where the variability comes from between that 2 to 7 inches possible up in that part of the state. On top of that, those temperatures are going to be varying between 36 to 32, so just hovering right around that freezing mark. So that's kind of the other issue, is just exactly how much of this will actually stick to the ground, and will any of it thaw or be able to melt away a little bit as it does fall. Meanwhile, back into Minnesota throughout the morning hours on Wednesday, you can see those storms continue to push off into the east. This rain kind of runs into some cold air to where you're going to be looking at the possibility at least of some snow, maybe some freezing rain across northern parts of Minnesota throughout the morning and into the afternoon on Wednesday. So look for slippery conditions across the north beginning on Wednesday already. Now, as we continue on into Wednesday night, you can see that precipitation continues to fall across the north in the form of maybe some freezing drizzle, maybe some freezing rain up there. So again, roads not looking real great up there. And we're also going to be watching these thunderstorms develop out of the central plains and move into the region by Friday morning. And as you can see here, once we get to about 4 a.m., they begin to move into southern parts of Minnesota. And as they continue to move to the northeast, those storms continue to move to the northeast, some of these could be strong with some gusty winds and some small hail. So don't be surprised, Ray, around 6 o'clock in the morning or so, 5 or 6 in the morning on Thursday, that some of you across the Twin Cities could hear a little hail pinging on top of the house. Now, what this is also going to do is as this batch of moisture, this big group, this abundance of moisture from the storms continue to move north and just kind of slam into this cold air, that's where some of that snowfall is really going to kick in and where some of that freezing rain is really going to kick in on Thursday across northern parts of Minnesota and into northeastern parts of North Dakota as well. Now, you notice for those of you kind of along the north shore and kind of in this northeastern parts of the state, it doesn't really transition over to snow. It's kind of somewhere in between that rain and freezing rain. It just depends on how cold those temperatures get on Thursday will ultimately determine what you get. It's looking more like the snow will be just kind of to the west of you and, like I said, into northeastern parts of North Dakota. So it's going to be interesting as to what exactly will fall across the North Country. Man, it's April. It's hard to determine. It's kind of one of those frustrating things. There's a lot of variabilities with these things as they move across this time of year. Now, continuing on into Thursday afternoon and eventually into Thursday night, you can see that cold air and that moisture wraps around the system, bringing snow across the Dakotas, northern parts of Minnesota, and eventually reaching down into more central parts of Minnesota and even into a little more southern parts of South Dakota as well as we reach into Friday morning. Now, through the day on Wednesday, you can see some of the stronger winds across the north. So if you get any snow across there, particularly across the northwestern parts of North Dakota, where we're expecting a little more of that snowfall to occur, we're looking at that 35 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts, maybe a few 45s in there as we go throughout the day on Wednesday. We'll also have some pretty stiff winds down across western parts of South Dakota that are going to be causing some issues for some high-profile vehicles. Now, moving on into Wednesday night, conditions actually improve for the most part, with the exception perhaps across the North Shore. And then as you get into Thursday and that snow really begins to ramp up across northern parts of Minnesota, look at that. It's actually not too bad throughout the day on Thursday, again with the exception being those usual suspects, that usual spot across the North Shore with the winds coming off the lake. So we're looking at the possibility of 40, 50 mile per hour wind gusts up there on Thursday. And then as we get into Thursday night and then into Friday, more so Friday, some of those winds kind of pick up on the backside of this northwesterly winds. So for those of you that are going to be getting snow or have snow or have received a little more snowfall, perhaps you're going to be seeing some of that drifting across the roads on Friday as we're looking at possible wind gusts at 30 to 40 miles per hour. But once again, once you get into Friday night and Saturday, those winds diminish off and really for the remainder of the weekend don't look too bad. And in fact, as we go through Friday night and get into Saturday morning, you can see those snow showers kind of end from west to east. We'll probably have some lingering snow showers throughout the day a little bit on Saturday across the northern parts of Minnesota, northeast parts of Minnesota. Kind of those snow showery type of activities, those daytime snow showers that just kind of pop up but don't really accumulate much. So just keep that in mind. You might still see some snow going into Saturday for those of you up there. But thankfully, as I said, that's really not expected to accumulate. And again, throughout the remainder of the weekend, pretty dry. And then as we get into next week, it just kind of depends on what model exactly you're going to go by. The European really doesn't have much for our area, but the American model wants to bring something in towards the later half of the week. But that's pretty far out there, folks. I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock into that at this point. And so just to give you an idea what the Weather Service is pointing towards as far as accumulating snowfall, here is North Dakota, and you can see up here, there's where we got that 11 to maybe even 12-inch mark in the far northwestern parts of the state. Otherwise, we're looking at kind of that 4-inch or more just north of that Highway 2 corridor. More so though west of Minot. Once you get east of Minot, you have to go a little bit further north to see some of those higher snowfall totals. Ultimately, kind of along Highway 2 just east of Minot, you're looking at somewhere in that 1 to 3 inch range. Now for Minnesota, and granted, this is just through Thursday, so we've got some more snow coming Friday. Not expecting a whole lot more accumulation with the snow showers on Friday, but most of it's going to occur on Thursday. So here's kind of what is expected throughout the day on Thursday. You can see, like I said, kind of that hole up in the northeastern parts of Minnesota where we might see a little more of that freezing rain or rain activity. So not as much really painted up there. It's more in that northwest, north central parts of the state where we're looking at kind of that 3 to 6 inch mark up kind of in that International Falls, Roseau, Hallock area. And then once you get a little bit further south, again, kind of along that Highway 2 corridor, you're kind of closer to that 1 to 3 inch mark. It's looking like most of the snow will stay north of that Highway 75, so north of St. Cloud, north of Cambridge. For those of you north of that line, basically, that's kind of where we're expecting that snowfall accumulation to occur. And here's just the icing potential map through Friday. Here's where we got that freezing rain, that sleet across the North Shore, where it could be kind of miserable up and through there. And in fact, some of those areas across northern parts of North Dakota could even see just a little bit of freezing precip as it transitions over to snow on Wednesday and into Wednesday night. So even a little bit of possibility there of some of those roads slicking up from the freezing rain before we add some snow on top of it. And one last thing to take a look at, this is the expected liquid precipitation. So if you melt the snow, you take into account all the rain. Look at that, we're getting about an inch of rain or moisture across the northern parts of North Dakota, lots of areas across Minnesota, particularly kind of in the eastern half of the state, we're looking at an inch, maybe even more with some of those thunderstorms down in the southeast where we could get up to an inch and a half of rain. And so while it'll be nice to clean up some of these areas with the rain and maybe add a little more moisture into the ground, I don't know if really that's what some of you need just because of the spring melt that is going on. Those rivers are filling up. At this point, I don't know how much more rain we really want until we get rid of all that snow. But unfortunately, for some of you, we are going to get an inch or more of liquid precipitation out of this by the time it's all said and done. So quite the dynamic storm. Once it's out of here this weekend, it looks a little more quiet beyond that, at least for a few days. So we've got something to look forward to there. All right, everybody, if you haven't done so already, make sure you hit the thumbs up button. I would appreciate that. That helps out my channel, gets it seen. And also feel free to subscribe if you want to leave a comment down below, ask any specific questions. Feel free to do that. Love to answer your questions in the comments. All right, everybody, for Region Weather Live, I'm meteorologist Brad Warner, and everybody, have a good day.